Tow all the fuel up to Britannia Beach because there was no road and there was no railroad at that time. So we towed the barge up loaded with drums, full drums, fuel for Britannia Beach mine. And we were out at Point Atkinson and we passed the tug Maple Prince. She was towing a train barge with trains on it. But unfortunately, it was pretty rough out there that day. And as she was going along, trains were going, the cars were going over the stern, into the water, overboard. So there was nothing you could do about it. No way at all. So that was it. I remember Point Atkinson for that. Now, you wanted to know about Point Grey. There was a tug called the Joe B. It was a small tug, towing a scow with a stainless steel boiler on it, the size of a boiler. I don't know where it was going to, but really worth money because it's being stainless steel. Unfortunately, it was rough out there that day, and the stainless steel boiler rolled off and went overboard, and they never did find it. I don't think they really went out and looked for it. Also, I remember when I was going around there towing for Gulf of Georgia, they had a fort up there during the war and the gun emplacement up there. And it was nothing for them to be shooting over the top of us at targets out in the Gulf. And every time they shot, your hat jumped off on your head. Then there was a picket boat out there. When you came down from the river or you were coming into Vancouver Harbor, you were supposed to go up and register with them to make sure you weren't the enemy. And it was a darn nuisance because you had to go out of your way to do it, especially if you were towing. So most of the time we went around them and beat it, and of course they had to get their anchor up and take after us to get us. But if we could get in underneath the bridge, which was the Kitsilano Railroad Bridge at False Creek, they couldn't come in after us there, so we'd always make it in there. Then they would complain to our office, and of course we had the best bosses, believe me, Staff Burns and Ray Bicknell. And I'd say to Staff Burns, you know, Staff, I guess they complained, did they? Oh yes, he said, but I told them we were working and they weren't, so he stuck up for us. Well, I was thinking about Dollarton, when the old Dollarton mill was there. When I was working for Captain W.Y. Higgs, Bill Higgs, on the Solander tug, we used to tow logs in there from Chemainus and Deep Bay and various places around the coast of BC into Dollarton. And then, of course, we had to tie them up there and get all our gear off it and the boom chains that we put on it to hold it together and everything. But the part about it, what got me was, years later, after I left Nanaimo Towing and Gulf Island Transportation, and I had to go up to the scour of the Fraser River for Gulf of Georgia and to False Creek. And also side of her when she blew up. And a month later, I collapsed. I went down to Bellingham with a friend of mine, and he and we were going to ride our motorcycles down, and he decided we'd drive down because I was feeling so dizzy. And we got into the 15-cent store down there, and I collapsed, and they drove me home. And I was sick for 8 years from that explosion, and the doctors say it was delayed concussion. So the BC towboat owners took me off the tugs and put me into their hiring hall, as it were. we were the personnel manager for 55 towboat companies. There were 50, well actually there were more than 55 towboat companies in those days, but we had 55 of them. And we had to put the captains on, the mates on, the cooks on, the deckhands on, the engineers on, the oilers on, and even the firemen on the coal-burning boats in those days, which they were. And we had about 2,000 people registered with us to go to work on the tugs, and one woman, she was a cook, and she was on the Doler, cooking on the Doler, and she did a good job. Yeah, she was an elderly lady and did a very good job, but the only woman cook we knew at that time. Also, there's a woman that got her captain's papers working out of New Westminster and around there. Now she's a doctor, unless she's retired. Well, I guess she would be retired about this time. So that's the story of the Towboat Employment Agency. The steel tugboats. I remember one that came out, and they were going up the coast and they were off Seashelt, and all of a sudden she just went down. The tug went down, and I figure that a rivet must have come loose, or some of the welding must have come loose, and one of the plates on the bottom, and the plate opened up and down she went. They saved one man, one crew member, but unfortunately he died, so we never did actually know what happened, and they never got it up because they didn't know exactly where it was. So that
So she's probably still down there now?
Oh yeah, she's still down there now. And then one of the York tugs was a steel tug. It was one of the Army tugs that was made in the middle of the United States, and she hit an island in Howe Sound and went down, and they never got her up. One fellow went down, and it was too deep, really. There was nothing to dive that deep at that time, but he made a diving bell, or whatever you want to call it, out of a hot water tank, a boiler, and went down in it, and he had a glass porthole so he could see what he was doing. But he got down there and the porthole cracked from the pressure, so he came up. It was time to get out of there. But there's still one of those tugs still running. It belongs to Evans Coleman Evans. And it's running, but they took the wheelhouse off it because it was steel, and they took the funnel off it. It was steel, and they made them out of aluminum because that was making them roll over. One of them rolled over at 10 Mile Point off Victoria, and they had no baffles in their fuel tanks or their water tanks, so the fluid was flowing over all the time. So over they went when it got rough. That's our first initiation into steel tugs.
Some kind of a longing for the old times when you're on the tugs.
Oh yes, we had a lot of fun. Really enjoyed it, and there was a lot of camaraderie. For instance, if we were towing a scow from, we'll say, from Vancouver Harbor into False Creek, because there was scow grounds there to tie them up, the tug Sumas lived up in False Creek, and he used to come in. If he saw you going to put the scow in, he'd come over and help you push it in, and that's the camaraderie we had. Another time we were up at Campbell River, and the tug Totem, incidentally the Totem was the first tug to have a Vivian engine. A Vivian was made in Vancouver. Bill Vivian built them, and the first tug to have one in was the Totem. And we were tied up in Campbell River waiting for the weather to bring a tow of logs down from Deep Bay, and it was snowing hard, so we had a snowball fight. Two of us tied alongside each other. Unfortunately, we threw a snowball at one of the deckhands on the Totem, and he ducked and he hit his head on the winch brake that you turn the brake on the winch. We had to take him to the hospital and get some stitches put in his head, but he didn't mind it too much. They were good sports. His parents and relatives are the Rays, who are very old timers in West Vancouver, and they own the tea shop down on the south shore of Burrard Inlet, where the ferry's tied up, and they had a tea shop down there, and they ran that for a while. And his uncle ran the commissary over here, or whatever you call it, where you can get eats in Ambleside Park. And he's only just left there. So that's the story of the old timers, and they were towing. We had another experience with the totem. We were towing out of Deep Bay, and we were cutting across the Gulf, you always headed for shelter, but that was open water, and it started to blow. And oh boy, did it blow. And we had the totem with us. The totem was a lot smaller than we were. And it got so rough that it broke the windows in the wheelhouse. The anchor came loose and punched a hole in the housework, and the winch started to get loose on the deck from being pulled, and of course we lost all the logs except the side sticks, and the totem was just disappear out of sight in the waves. So I said to Gordon Allen, who owned the totem, when we finally got tied up, "What did you do with your deckhand?" He was known as Weenie. Well, he said, "I locked him down in the forecastle so he wouldn't get washed overboard." So he must have had quite a wild ride down there, believe me. So that was some of the things. There was one other funny occurrence. We had another tug, Bill Higgs had another tug, called the, I can't remember its name. I'll think of it in a minute. And I was at the wheel. The skipper was in bed, I was the mate, and it was the Mint. And there was a knock on the wheelhouse door, and it was the cook. And I said, "What do you want?" He said, "I thought I'd better tell you that one of the light boxes on the mast is on fire." Well, I said, "Go and put it out. Climb up the rigging and go and put it out." Oh. So he shut the door. And of course, it caught fire because we had an old Fairbanks crude oil diesel engine in, and it was spitting out carbon. It would land in the light boxes. And he came back and knocked on the door again. He says that it's on fire again. Well, I said, "Why don't you go and put it out?" Well, he says, "I don't know about that." Oh, I said, "Just let it burn." He says, "Okay." So those are some of the queer things that happened. When they were building it, and it collapsed, as you know, I was the Marine advisor for search and rescue. So we called all the tugs we could get, and L&K, Lytle Towing, I went on one of their tugs up to the scene and took charge of the scene up there. But, oh, they were all so good. And we got all the guys that got in the water, but because we didn't get the fellows that were killed. But I guess it was funny at the time. My car was rigged with a flashing red light and a siren, and I was going down by the Second Narrows Bridge on the waterfront to get onto one of the tugs to go and work from there. And there was a big fat guy kept running in front of me. I couldn't get past him. And I had the siren on and everything. He wouldn't move. Pretty soon an RCMP car came alongside me. He says, "I'll fix him." He went up and he got the guy and put him in the car and arrested him for holding me up. But if you could have seen that guy run, he really going. He was so fat that every time he went up, the fat went down. But that was a bad accident, that one, really bad. And I had even our volunteer, you better go down again because you'll never go down again if you don't have a lot in common with the old Second Narrows Bridge.
Do you recall how many tugs were involved in that rescue operation?
Oh, I couldn't tell you. There were dozens of them.
Kates were there, I suppose.
Oh, yes. Oh, you bet they were. And Dola towing. Oh, lots of them. I didn't count how many there were. But certainly lots of them. And they did great work. There's only one funny side of the story. All my volunteers from Jericho, Norm Pelkey, he had a high-speed boat. He came over to help. And so I called him over and told him there were so many people there, boats and things, looking in the way.
Yeah.
I told him to get them out of there. So he went up to them and told them to get out of there. And he told one boat, I know it was a blue boat, I remember it, and he says, you're told to get out of here so the tugs can work, and the rescue boats can work. And this guy said, who said so? He says, Captain Andrews said so. Oh, well, he said, I will gladly get out of here, but you tell Captain Andrews that the harbor master says, gives his regards to him, and we'll get out of the way. So